and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Peter Counter and I'm the editor-in-chief of Find Biometrics and Mobile ID World, the internet's leading resources for identity and biometrics education and expertise. On this episode of ID Talk, I am joined by Tim Brown, Global Identity Officer for Prove, a provider of platform-based identity verification and authentication. Brown and I discuss identity verification in financial services and healthcare, and those are a fascinating pair of topics since the financial sector is often cited as an example of how much potential the healthcare space holds for strong identity technologies. We start off by reviewing the current identity threats facing financial services providers and dig into the best strategies for mitigating fraud and keeping up in the ongoing security arms race. From there, we launch into our healthcare conversation. We discuss how identity verification can improve patient outcomes, some lesser-known healthcare use cases, and how to address persistent adoption challenges in the healthcare space. It's always a pleasure to have Tim on the podcast, so let's get straight to it. Here's Prove's Global Identity Officer, Tim Brown, right here on the ID Talk podcast. I'm joined now by Tim Brown, Global Identity Officer at Prove, and today we're going to discuss the game-changing applications of identity verification in financial services and healthcare. Tim, thank you for joining me on ID Talk.
Thank you for having me, Peter. It's been a little while, but I'm glad to be back.
It has been. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and I'm glad to have you back. I'd like to start off on the topic of fraud in the financial sector. So, as we know, fraud is constantly evolving as fraudsters, bad actors, hackers, they attempt to outpace security innovation. So my first question for you is, what are the most pressing fraud threats that are facing FinTech today?
It's interesting. I think hidden in that question, you just outlined what most of us think about when we think about fraud. That's third-party fraud. That's when you have a hacker or somebody, nefariously password stuffing or breaking into your account or getting into your laptop and getting access to those things. But this, I think for 23, I think we're seeing an emergence of large-scale emergence of new types of fraud, or at least or refocusing on fraud, like old types of fraud are showing back up. Things like check stealing and things like that, stealing them out of your mailbox. Sort of old school fraud, if you will. But I think more importantly, or I guess if you're a bank or a fintech, that what becomes more interesting is that things like first person fraud, where I'm attempting to defraud you by claiming I didn't conduct that transaction, or things like authorized push payment fraud, where there's a lot in the news over the last 6 months about somebody convincing John Doe to transfer money to them across a payment network and defrauding them that way.
Absolutely. And I mean, that really fits into my next question here, because it really seems like and we've seen this in some of our research and reporting, it seems like as the system itself has really shored up its borders to protect from direct attacks, it really seems like identity and the human being becomes the vector of attack there, right? So, I mean, my next question is, what identity strategies are really best for mitigating these fraud threats that you're outlining there?
Well, I think we've all experienced various types of identity strategies that are cumbersome. Things like when present your driver's license and your selfie. I think that grew in popularity over the pandemic as people were trying to access unemployment benefits or benefits for economic recovery, things like that. But those are grounded in not just the document authentication types of strategies, but also in risk-based authentication. One of the challenges that we've seen with risk-based authentication, or RBAs, is that they rely on an ever dwindling supply of data points. Things like IP addresses, email addresses, those types of things. Especially when you look at things that Apple is doing to preserve privacy through their mobile platforms, they're starting to discount or discontinue access to those types of data points. So like, hiding your IP address or hiding your email, randomly generating email or that's anonymous for you when you're, accessing a new account or something like that. Those are really kind of pulling the legs out on those stools of RBAs, making it more and more challenging for them to be effective. One of the things that we do at Prove, which has been, we believe is quite effective, is actually we made an early bet on cryptographic authentication instead of RBAs. And what I mean by that is that, we rely on a cryptographic truth or something that's bound directly to the individual, like a mobile phone, specifically the SIM card and mobile phone, and we tie that back quite well to the individual to a point that it's a deterministic authentication that allows us to prove that that Tim is indeed holding his phone and is interacting with us when he's onboarding as a new client into a platform or creating a new account or something like that, or it's a way for us to be able to quickly authenticate you or bind your identity to the device and then be able to leverage that in future authentication attempts. It's a very elegant approach to solving the problem that doesn't rely on this consumption of all these different data signals that are slowly getting phased out because of privacy implementations by the platform vendors.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, that's really where I think the industry kind of has to go in order to survive, is that privacy first, core identity at the core philosophy. And I also want to just quickly thank you for using yourself in that example. Often as this podcast, people are always casting me as the fraud victim or the fraudster. So
yeah, no worries. I'll make a note of that. So next time I can point that out. It's really interesting. You'd asked about some of the challenges to FinTechs and financial institutions in the first question. I think when you go back and you look at, what are the technologies that are being deployed to be able to attack that or address those challenges. I mean, it's not just the identity verification side of it where we're establishing the identity, but it's the identity reuse, right? It's the, I think, FIDO2 and, passkeys, Apple and Google and Samsung made a big splash this past year talking about how they were implementing the FIDO2 specification to enable a passwordless future, where we can finally not have to worry about, remembering thousands of passwords or, coming up with cryptic password approaches or, long phrases or something like that. I think it's going to be a big push towards securing our online future. I've always been pretty, bullish about passwordless authentication. I've been part of the FIDO Alliance and now Proves back into the FIDO Alliance, which is great. We're, in looking at how we strongly bind identity to that passwordless credential is going to be paramount, though, because I mean, it's one thing to say that it's okay, we can, replace your password. You don't have to use password when you're logging in, but you really want to make sure that Tim is indeed the person who's trying to log in and establish that passwordless credential.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about, we use the term trust anchor, but then it's about using that anchor and then having a very strong, like unbreakable chain of trust that is constantly referencing that trust anchor. I wanted to also ask, because we've sort of outlined the ways that this issue can be addressed, but you mentioned that early on Prove sort of bet on the cryptographic paradigm that you guys go through, and I'm wondering, kind of carrying that forward, how does Prove stay ahead in this arms race that we've sort of outlined between fraudsters and identity and security?
That is a excellent question. I think we have a pretty robust roadmap for where we are going to go in 23 and beyond. We're obviously, I mean, things like expansion of our reach globally. So we're starting to get into more countries to be able to provide the types of services that we do here in the United States. You know, technology, or the types of signals that we leverage to be able to establish that cryptographic authentication, be it a mobile authentication or data reliant on mobile operators may vary depending on the areas that we're in. So we're looking at new and novel ways to be able to approach some of those problems, to be able to ascertain whether devices in the hands of the person that's supposed to be in there. So I think there's going to be, as we go global, there are going to be challenges around how we approach trying to answer that cryptographic question. Leveraging things like FIDO2 or passkeys is going to be crucial too. And as you point, I really like that term, trust anchor. Making sure that we are anchoring our trust where it needs to be, and with the right identity. I think that we also have to be flexible, because I think there are going to be some verticals that we target. We briefly touched on healthcare earlier. In previous conversations that we've had, verticals like healthcare and federal government spaces where they're always going to, or at least going to, rely on document authentication. So being able to enable technologies that power document authentication and selfie capture, simply because of the regulations that are in place to require that, things like NIST 863 here in the United States, we will be looking to make that much better. Personal plug, we're getting ready to push out a blog post of mine that talks about how cryptographic authentication, specifically the platform that we call Pinnacle here internally, can power and can improve and handle attacks like video injection and things like that much better. Those are things that plague those types of technologies. So I think we'll as we start going globally and start pushing into some of these other verticals, we'll be making things much better by partnerships and things like that. And also looking at how additional keys that are out there that we can leverage, be it device-based keys, these additional FIDO keys or FIDO tokens, those types of things. Looking at new technologies to help us rebind in the future, so not being so reliant on some of those other technologies that I talked about from mobile operators. Things like, how do we go and use different types of technologies, behavioral. We have a wonderful gate technology that came into our company a couple of years ago that we're, when we go to do a rebind, rather than making it so heavy on the user to go out and query mobile operators, networks, and things like that, how can we manage that reissuance through technologies like behavioral? I think that coupled with establishing a very large reusable identity base. That's actually my new role here, is to figure out how we can build a strategy around identity reusability globally. So anybody in the digital ecosystem of the world wants to participate by having a reusable identity that they can take with them across the digital ecosystem, to interact with varying different types of properties and merchants and things like that. We want to be the ones that empower that.
Absolutely. I mean, as an end user, that is music to my ears. There's nothing more frustrating than having to go through that high friction process of re-enrolling, and then as a putting my ID Talk host hat back on, it's also kind of alarming to think about sort of the trail of devices with your identity information that you leave behind.
That's right.
That's a really exciting feature. You mentioned healthcare, which we've talked about before, but I'd like to talk about it again, because healthcare, it still is one of the biggest potential markets for identity verification. And I mean, before we started this call, we were already kind of talking about this a little bit. Just it's only the need for identity verification in the health space has only grown in the past few years. So my first question about healthcare is, how can identity verification improve patient outcomes and hospital operations?
Well, I mean,
Starting you on a big one.
That's a broad question, right? I mean, I think obviously patient identity is crucial. I mean, I'd say patient and provider identity is crucial in all those things. So establishing that you are who you're supposed to be when you walk through the door, or more importantly, when you're sitting in a remote session with your provider, is important. It's important for our privacy. It's important that you're getting the medications that you should have, that your doctor is just not talking to somebody who is that's not you. I mean, that's behave. I try to act like you. There's telehealth is a big one. I think as we've gotten back to normalcy in the world, obviously a touchless space inside of hospitals is going to become important. So interacting with kiosks and things like that, where you'll use a mobile phone or something to check in, to you're going in for your morning surgery, that I can walk in and interact with a kiosk. Well, how do I make sure that it's Tim that I'm interacting with, and not Peter coming in because he really is anxious to get the same coming to get my colonoscopy, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's so I think there's a lot of from a patient's perspective, there's a lot of opportunity for us to improve the interaction and the outcomes through positive identity verification. On the flip side of that, from a provider perspective, I think it's clearly having the right people access patient data is important. So whether it's in hospital network systems, or a doctor sitting at home trying to do prescriptions for controlled substances from their mobile device, those types of things that require positive doctor ID as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's something that we is often left out of these conversations, is the importance of the identity verification on behalf of the providers, because just thinking about one option here, or one threat vector is the controlled substances you mentioned. There's an opioid crisis on our continent right now in North America, and the door swings both ways on where those controlled substances can leak out into the communities, and that's obviously very dangerous.
Sure.
Like I said, we don't really talk too much about provider ID, but are there any other use cases for identity verification in healthcare that often go overlooked?
Yeah, I would think I was actually sitting here as we're talking, thinking about our routine trips to the pharmacy to pick up my prescriptions. I mean, I think when you and I talked back in 2018, 2019, with a lot of discussion about mobile identity, and how one of the shining use cases that we talked about was Tim goes and picks up his medicine from the pharmacy. I use a remote locker, or maybe it's a delivery pharmacy. I'm applying for it online to make sure I can get it mailed to me. Those types of things. I see that pharmacies are an area that are in prescription delivery is an area that's ripe for basically overturning the current paradigm. I wonder, I look at technologies like verified credentials that are bound to a strong identity, and think about how those things on a mobile phone will really kind of drive us to being able to have a doctor issue directly to my prescription, and my prescription to my mobile, my verified credential, my wallet on my device, and then I can take that to whatever pharmacy I want. It's sort of interesting to me when I think about the interaction that we currently have. So I walk down the road, or I drive down the road to go see my doctor. He gives me a prescription. He calls the pharmacy, lets them know I'm coming to get it, and I show up at the pharmacy. 9 times out of 10, it seems like they don't have any record of it anyway. So then the next thing that happens is like 3 or 4 phone calls back to the doctor's office, if they answer at all, because they get routed out to to an answering service or something like that. That just seems mind-boggling to me, that we have such a clumsy and antiquated system that's sort of this triangular approach to passing moving data securely, or making sure that the right identity, right person is holding that. I look at a technology like a decentralized ID or verified credentials where I can have my doctor simply just issue my prescription into my wallet. It's digitally signed by him or her, and I can walk that to the pharmacy, and they don't care that the doctor is not available. I can, just present that. They can validate the signature. They know that it's authentic based on that digital signature, and they can issue that to me, knowing that I have the right identity as well, because it's all rooted in that root of trust, or that it's bound to my person. And all that's tied onto a mobile device, to loop back to what we were talking about earlier, that's cryptographically bound to me. And I have a very high assurance that the identity is who they claim to be.
Yeah, for sure. And that level of trust really, I mean, it's obviously it's a convenience issue, but I think sometimes when we're talking about healthcare specifically, it's easy to think about this in terms of, oh, it's really annoying that I have to do these things twice, or sometimes they don't have my medication. But we are talking about things like medication, and that's not like something that should be treated frivolously. Some
Right.
people need it for very serious maladies, and so it's really great. And then on a just an operational standpoint, we know that there are some incoming changes to HIPAA that are going to require the safe transfer of that information to be even faster than it needs to be now. And so it just seems like the right solution for healthcare. But on that note, like you said, we had a similar conversation to this many years ago, and even back then, our industry generally has seen or positioned healthcare as sort of the next big space in identity biometrics, identity verification. And people see it as sort of having the same potential as financial services. But resource and cost barriers are still stalling that uptake. My question is, right now in 2023, what can be done to address adoption challenges for identity verification in healthcare, so we can start to see this like more convenient, safer world that you're painting a picture of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. The cost barriers when we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry is an interesting way to put it, right? So this is an industry that spends tons of money, and that we all have sticker shock when we look at our healthcare payments, our premium payments every month, right? They until recently, I think they've had little incentive to invest in secure and high quality digital experiences. But I think that we can thank Apple. We can thank a lot of these companies who have built premium customer experiences along the way over the last 15 or 20 years. That as consumers, we're starting to demand more from our healthcare providers. It's a long. I mean, logging into my insurance company's website now has come a long way since the 2010 or going back several years. So I think it's getting better. I think they're starting to invest, and they're starting to realize that we're, as consumers, are demanding more of that. We look at there's opportunities for us to improve the experiences that patients have that are onboarding while keeping security very high. So as healthcare companies are starting to look at ways to bring more patients in, or get them more into the digital ecosystems or spheres, they need ways that they can reliably onboard and acquire new customers or existing customers to make sure that they are who they are, and they want to do that in a way that's pleasing to the end user. And I think that we'll start to see more investment there, simply because consumers are demanding it. And like you said, right, that there are regulations that are being put in place to be able to, laws that are pushing this. I mean, not just here in the United States. You can look at the EU and their EIDAS regulations are mandating that that healthcare. They call out specifically healthcare use cases as one of the areas that we have to enforce a much more improved identity experience. And specifically, they're talking about verified credentials over there. But here in the United States, it's I think we'll see both government push and consumer push to improve the experiences that we have.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, you started off with just like a really great point, is that it's a lot of times when we talk about cost adoption barriers, it really is a prioritization issue and not a cost issue. And so hopefully this, the awareness and education really does start to push it.
And I wonder too if some of this will come from the providers as well. I mean, I think there's a scaling healthcare and making it more accessible to more people. I think is I think COVID accelerated sort of this whole telehealth movement where we can call in and talk to our doctors for you've got a sore throat, you want to know what it is. It's not doesn't necessitate certainly doesn't need a trip to the ER. And and you doesn't need to go in. You don't need to go into an office to see your doctor for that. I think you'll see more of that. So I suspect that providers are also very interested in driving access through telehealth and things like that, because you're going to scale better, gives them an opportunity to kind of see more patients. Maybe drives their own profit motives, those types of things. Just keeps them safe too, right? I mean, during COVID, it was, I remember going to my doctor during COVID, and it was, they were seeing like 1 or 2 patients an hour simply because they had to keep us spaced apart. And now they're able to have a much better ability to see more patients in a safe way through telehealth. But of course, because of the regulations that are out there, you want to make sure you're seeing the right patient. And so both sides, I think, similar to the earlier conversation, about controlled substances and doctor patient access to data. It's we'll see I think pushes on both sides of the coin here.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like it's the missing link to really make that digital channel for healthcare really viable, like a viable option for patients, for patient care.
Right.
So we're just about out of time here, but before we go, I know you mentioned a little bit about what's ahead for 2023, but what can we expect from Prove in the coming year?
I think we're gonna continue to grow. It's interesting. I think as a company, I'm pretty excited. I'm very excited to be here. That we see a lot of tech companies that are struggling or had rapid expansion, and now they're having a hard time keeping up. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of layoffs in the industry. I think Prove is well positioned to be successful through 23 and beyond. We're looking at some new verticals like iGaming, which are continue to enjoy a lot of growth. I mean, obviously, healthcare is very interesting to me, and I think we'll probably see a lot of pushing in that direction too. We will, our global expansion. We're moving into other countries like Brazil and India, United Kingdom, keeping a close eye on the EU. Specifically because of their work, the push in verified credential space and how that's going to apply out to their population for interacting at different verticals there. So I think that we'll see some exciting growth. We'll continue our trajectory in 23 and beyond. Reusable identity is very interesting to me. It always is. How can I walk my identity around the world, the digital world, and trust that it's the same. It's the same. I have my control or agency over my identity, so I can share with the right people, knowing what exactly that I am sharing, so being privacy enhancing and things like that.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, that's really exciting to hear, and I can only agree and look forward to our next conversation as that kind of comes to fruition. Tim, thanks so much for joining me again on ID Talk. Love having you here. Hope to have you back soon. Before we go, how can our listeners get in touch with you to learn more about the topics we discussed today?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, your listeners are welcome to email me at tim.brown@prove.com, or they can check out our website at www.prove.com.
Fantastic. And check out look for those links in the show notes. You can just scroll down on your device and click on them, and you can get in touch with Tim. Thanks again, Tim. Really looking forward to our next conversation.
Peter. Best.
And so concludes my interview with Tim Brown, Global Identity Officer at Prove. To learn more about the topics discussed in this episode, visit prove.com or follow the links in the show notes. And for everything else identity, stay posted to Find Biometrics and Mobile ID World. I would like to thank Tim Brown for returning to the podcast and Logomrad for providing our podcast theme music. I have been your host, Peter Counter. Thank you for listening to the ID Talk podcast.